They came from outer space, descending from the stars in a quintet of horizontal rows that each had 11 enemy units. A force that was 55 aliens strong in total. As they continued to move down through the atmosphere, the Heimdall satellite released a distress signal to the SCP Foundation. The Space Invaders were here. Like the smash hit 1978 video game for the Atari, these aliens were a killer sensation that would be sweeping every nation. These persistent pixelated powerhouses could very easily take over the world if not met with resistance. When it comes to the game that invented unlimited arcade mode, that resistance had better be skillful and record-breaking, or a digital doom for the whole planet was only a matter of which side ran out of quarters to give. This was not 1978, and it wasn't a harmless 8-bit interactive high-score experience. This was the present day, and it was real life. There was no escape. Projectiles of unknown technological origin rained down upon the Earth, decimating all defenses that they came in contact with. The Space Invaders started their bombardment with the Great Wall of China, believing it to be Earth's most fortified bunker due to its size and length. The Foundation was quick to swoop in to protect one of the human race's most famous monuments. Through the use of sophisticated ground-to-air artillery, the SCP Foundation was able to return fire on the aliens, reducing the number of Space Invaders from 55 down to 0 in short order. But that initial grouping was only the beginning, as the heavens produced 55 more fighters from the invading force that began once again pelting the surface of the Earth with long-range extraterrestrial bullets. If we lose China's Great Wall, all semblance of normalcy goes with it. The world's population will know that we are not in control. These were the words of General Taito, a tactical analyst in the SCP Foundation's Eastern Branch, who was currently leading the initiative against the Space Invaders. He slammed his fist on the table in a manly fashion and demanded suggestions from all the other researchers and military personnel present. SCP Foundation artillery and even aerial fighters could only hold the incoming waves of Space Invaders so long. To make matters worse, it was quickly discovered that each set of rows beyond the first would arrive faster and more aggressively than the previous one. Air forces and drones could hardly get close to the invaders without winding up as twisted heaps of scrap metal, as the aliens crashed their stellar bodies into the Earthling technology without even a scratch in return. At one point, it was even suggested that a nuclear weapon be launched from Earth towards the Space Invaders in order to neutralize an entire wave at once. It would have been a move reminiscent of the Smart Bomb power-up that could clear entire screens in fixed shooter arcade games. But this was no game, and even if a nuclear missile could rid the sky of invaders temporarily, the fallout would mean the repeated usage of warheads would be costly for the lives of the planet below. We're faced with an enemy that adapts to our every move and becomes more powerful. The more we try to destroy them, the worse we'll have it when the next wave hits. General Taito made it clear to the assembled war room that letting the Space Invaders touch down on the ground was not an option. Much like an arcade game with multiple levels, it would be game over for the human population if these aliens were able to establish a ground assault. With the challenge level of the enemy rapidly increasing, there was only so long that non-anomalous military units could hold out. Even if other groups of interest were brought in to deal with each new wave of 55 aliens, the casualties among Earth's allied forces would start to add up. Coupling that with the total lack of knowledge regarding how many waves of Space Invaders remained, the Foundation had every reason to fear a battle of attrition. What they needed to launch a significant counterattack against the invasion was a combat asset that could match the enemy force in its ability to become more ferocious with each new stage of the battle. Likewise, the asset would need to be able to endure a long-term fight against a foe that may never stop coming. It was less about winning for the Foundation and more about creating the aerospace defense equivalent of a perpetual motion machine, an unbreakable wall to keep the rest of Earth out of the line of fire. Several suggestions were given, from semi-anomalous mobile task forces to various SCPs, but when it came time to choose, there was only one real option. SCP-682, the hard-to-destroy reptile, was transported to the site closest to where the Space Invaders had been descending. Once informed of the plan by General Taito and the rest of Foundation Command, the fighter jets that were already in the air turned their guns on the freshly released SCP-682. The machine gun fire wouldn't deal significant damage to the creature, but it would goad it into following the terrestrial aircrafts into the sky. Once airborne, SCP-682 would be lured into the flight path of the Space Invaders, and an endless battle would begin. The SCP Foundation's plan was to use the tireless fury of 682 to halt the advance of the invasion long enough to think of a more permanent solution, if there even was one. Further readings from the Heimdall satellites seem to indicate that each new wave of 55 aliens emerged from empty space without a clear origin point. It was as if they were spawning in at the top of the stratosphere and descending on Earth from there. There were no clear energy signatures or backwards traceable pathways to whatever pixelated dimension the Space Invaders came from, so for now, it was not possible to take the fight away from Earth. Back on the surface, SCP-682 had begun to react to the effects of the Air Force's assault. In order to fight back against its attackers, the hard-to-destroy reptile sprouted a pair of powerful wings and took to the sky. Much of its bone matter was distributed to the connective tissue of these fleshy, bat-like wings, making the reptile much lighter and swifter in the air. It pursued the planes that shot it above the clouds, which was where first contact between SCP-682 and the current wave of Space Invaders took place.
"I've seen disgusting creatures before,"
the reptile croaked.
"but these are beyond disgusting."
As was expected with every exposure to a previously unknown type of living thing, SCP-682 hated the aliens and thought them worthy only of total eradication. The invaders seemed to agree, as one of their projectiles of energy collided with SCP-682's hide, vaporizing a chunk of the lizard's flesh and bone. This caused the hard-to-destroy reptile to bellow in rage and zoom into the fray. The previously resilient body of aliens, which could survive head-on collisions with the latest in military aircraft, were easily torn to bloodless pixelated shreds by the teeth and claws of SCP-682. "682 has engaged the enemy. We are pulling back," said Benny Abrams, an MTF aerial pilot. Benny and the jets retreated, leaving only the hard-to-destroy reptile and the Space Invaders to duke it out in the airspace above the Great Wall of China. The projectiles launched from the Space Invaders could still deal a high level of damage to SCP-682's body mass, but the reptile's kill count of aliens quickly rose from 0 all the way to 55. In other words, the lizard was getting swifty on those retro arcade goblins and really showing them what it got. From the screen displays in ground control, General Taito clenched his manly fist and shed a single, incredibly masculine tear.
"Give 'em hell, 682.
Taito growled. This incredible fight was just beginning, however, as a new wave of aliens spawned into Earth's sky. In order to do battle with SCP-682, the invaders approached in their typical collective serpentine pattern, moving back and forth like a pendulum as they shot their energy blasts through the open air towards their new target. There was another dimension to the battle now, which SCP-682 had become aware of from the moment it began to directly engage with the invaders. If it wasn't apparent from the ground or the data collected by the Heimdall satellite, it was now clear that the Space Invaders brought with them an intense, bit-crushed music track that had been picking up speed with each new wave. The music seemed to emanate from the empty space around the invaders, whether they were in space or within the clouds. Much like the mysterious question of where the invaders were spawning from, the music track did not have any traceable origin. It seemed to echo from completely out of nowhere, without any regard to the way that sound waves were supposed to carry across great distances. SCP-682's reptilian eardrums pounded with the ongoing beat of this retro-style refrain as it continued to blare through the skies. Like armies of old, the Space Invaders seemed to be hyping themselves up with the extra-dimensional equivalent of a Bugle Boy regiment. If these aliens had any concept of morale, it was certainly being bolstered in proportion to how fast the music that accompanied them was being played. The next wave was mowed down as systematically and mercilessly as the previous, but like every wave before, the combat potency of the newest force deployed by the invaders was markedly better than what preceded them. But the appearance of morale and a unified front had never been enough to match the strength and brutality of SCP-682, an undeniable fact which, for once, the SCP Foundation was actually grateful for. More than not growing fatigued in a protracted melee, SCP-682 seemed to increase its own offensive capabilities in direct response to each buff the Space Invaders received. The steady pace of the coming waves seemed to actually be working in SCP-682's favor. When taken by surprise through unforeseen forms of attack, the hard-to-destroy reptile usually suffered a delay in its adaptation. Repeated usage of the same sort of weapons or force against SCP-682 would generally accelerate its adaptation speed, but if it was given time to adjust to a pattern, the regeneration and mutation of the big lizard would ramp up in response to its adversary. While the Space Invaders were relentless in their assault and could potentially be infinite in the number of waves they could send, their repetitive nature meant that the aliens were one-trick ponies as far as SCP-682's suite of adaptations was concerned. Every time a new wave would drop, it would become more difficult to defend against by a steady amount. In the same vein, SCP-682 would increase its fighting capabilities at an equivalent rate. The SCP Foundation's plan to forestall the Space Invaders was working better than it had hoped, as even if the waves kept coming for the rest of time, there was no ceiling to the strides that 682 could make in improving its means of overcoming each new wave more efficiently than the prior one. In fact, SCP-682 was starting to change in shape, becoming an optimized machine that could battle the invaders like it was second nature. The lizard had begun to take a lower position away from the spawn point of the invaders, where it had plenty of space to strafe back and forth as it launched near-identical projectiles to those of the invaders back in their direction, as if it was picking up its own steam from the beat of the invaders' music. SCP-682 was shooting them up as efficiently as a pinball wizard on caffeine with 1/4 to spare. During one of the waves, an unusual straggler of an alien starship flew across the sky in an erratic pattern. Sensing a new possibility in its enemy's attack formation, SCP-682 shot down this mystery ship and was awarded with an arcade ping and a feeling of accomplishing a bonus objective. In the high-score game, the Mad Monster of Destruction was ruthless and as unrelenting as the invaders themselves. The reptile had become a one-unit air force, dodging incoming fire and clearing out opposition without even letting the Space Invaders close in for melee combat. It was hard for the onlookers at the Foundation to keep track of how many waves had been spawned by the enemy force at this point, especially as the Lizard Wizard blazed through all of them with competitive speed. It was hard to believe that this flying cannon of an anomaly was even 682 anymore. The speed of the invasion and the music continued to accelerate, and the visual readouts of all the Foundation's tech started to have a more difficult time keeping up with the action. Before long, the appearance of the battle was as simplistic and flat to those observing it through the screens as an arcade game from 1978 would have been. Yet the Space Invaders did not stop sending in new waves, and the clash between these endless aliens and SCP-682 continued beyond the impossible, as both sides reached speeds beyond the ability for modern technology to follow. It was likely that the Space Invaders never anticipated such canny opposition for their style of continuous warfare, and whatever parameters that allowed them to keep deploying identical but faster groups of 55 had spiraled out of all projected outcomes for this battle. When both sides of a conflict fight indefinitely with no change to their raw statistics or stamina, the result would usually be a stalemate. However, neither the Space Invaders or SCP-682 knew the meaning of surrender. From the moment these two forces became locked on destroying the other, their shared fate had been sealed. Like the undead cursed pirates, Captain Jack Sparrow and Hector Barbossa from the first movie of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, the hard-to-destroy reptile and the invasion were now two immortal foes locked in battle for all of time. Even the invincible SCP-682 could start to feel the unintended side effects of its adaptation, as all other things in existence seemed to fade to black around it. The only other entity that it could focus on was the oncoming waves of Space Invaders, which it was still wiping out with preternatural skill and efficiency. The waves were coming quicker and quicker, but nothing except for the hard-to-destroy reptile could even perceive their number and frequency now. The battle for Earth had sped up beyond the bounds of matter itself, transcending into the world of pure light and sound. The music was now an unintelligible dirge of clicks and bleeps that cycled through its melody in fractions of a second. Somehow, on the other side of light speed, SCP-682 could still hear its enemy's theme thundering in the void of infinity. Whatever had come before this fight was a distant and irrelevant memory. The pixelated cannon of pure energy that was once known as SCP-682 would not rest until all of the disgusting alien life forms were exterminated for good. Back on the perceptual plane, both SCP-682 and the Space Invaders had vanished completely from consensus reality. With great manly pride in the work of the SCP Foundation, General Taito declared that the fight had been won. The enemy force and 682 had effectively contained each other, and neither would be a threat to the planet ever again. Now go check out how to actually kill SCP-682 or SCP-682 termination testing for more.